childhood trauma, we have early childhood trauma, we have infant trauma, we even have the womb trauma. If you really go into it, it's so deep. Some people are born with a spirit of rejection because of what happened in the womb. So maybe they were planned abortion, and the abortion didn't work out, so God planned for that individual to be on planet Earth. But that child who was in the womb of the mother, he experienced the emotions in the mother's womb that is being rejected, that they don't want him. They don't want him to be here. So then he's born into a spirit of rejection. So many of the trauma, many of the wounds come from our very, very early years. And then what we said today before yesterday, then you have your acute trauma as well, where there's a once-off traumatic event in your life, like a hijacking or a robbery that went wrong, or you were part of a crime scene. Somebody explained that they broke into his church, and what happened in the church is they were all exposed to the crime scene and they suffered the trauma after the crime scene. So what I want to do today is I want to talk on immediate and some delayed reaction to trauma. And as we said, it's time that as leaders of the church, me coming from a church background, being a full-time pastor for 26 years of my life, I know that sometimes we do not have time to stop and pause with all our people if they go through trauma, if they are wounded, because there's so many things that we have to attend to as the leader of the house. I spoke to Apostle Henny. We had a chat early this morning when we came, and we said sometimes when you go into ministry, it is expected of us to do everything. We must be the master of everything in ministry. So the pastor must be able to paint the church. He must be able to do the tiling of the church. He must be able to do the garden of the church. He must be able to do the plumbing of the church. And he must preach, and he must visit, and he must do counseling, and he must do deliverance, and he must be the prayer warrior in the church. So he must be a jack of all trades. And then many of you sitting here today, you are pastors, you are in full-time ministry, then sometimes it just gets too much. The pressure on me is just too much. So many pastors spend more time trying to heal their people than what they spend in the presence of God to get a message for the people. So it's time that pastors, it's time that the church come to the realization that we can raise up the body. We can train the body. There's members in my church who have a heart to look after the wounded. In your church, there's members who want to reach out to people that has gone through trauma, who are sitting with traumatic wounds in their lives. But we don't give them the opportunity. We don't train them. We don't take them from where they are and we put them into their ministry. And I think that's what Pastor Abby said to us, is intrinsic motivation. It is something that motivates you from the inside to affect the world on the outside. Not allowing the outside to affect my inside, but my inside to affect the outside. So what I want to just quickly spend some time on today is immediate and delayed reactions to trauma, because there is immediate reactions to a trauma. If somebody walks into this church now and they hold us at gunpoint and they beat us around and they steal our stuff and they steal our cars on the outside and they steal our cell phones, this is the reaction we're going to have is going to be an immediate reaction. So we are going to react to what is happening to us. So, but then, as time goes by, in maybe 3 weeks' time or 4 weeks' time, 6 months' time, sometimes a year, sometimes 30 years later, we still have some reactions. There's still things happening to us because of what happened in church that day, because they robbed us in church. So that is the difference between immediate and delayed reactions. And we have different areas that we look in. And the first one is immediate emotional reactions. What is happening to that person emotionally? And I know our speaker from Nigeria, she spoke on emotional intelligence. And when she said emotional intelligence, it means that we have to understand our emotions. And that we react from our emotions. If we are happy, how do we express it? If we're sad, how do we express those emotions? But some immediate emotional reactions to any kind of trauma. And remember what we said the day before yesterday. It's not only a hijacking or a crime scene or something like that causes trauma in our lives. It can be just taking a child out of one school and putting him in another school without getting the guidance for that, without helping him to adjust it. It's moving from one country to another country. I don't know if you follow the media about the woman, they moved from South Africa to Timaru in New Zealand, and when they got to New Zealand, she actually murdered her 3 young daughters because she couldn't, the move was too big for her. Emotionally, internally, she could not handle this move. Moving from South Africa, you know, if my daughter stays in New Zealand, the houses in New Zealand are very, very small. Very, very small. And I know one of the things she said is they had to move from their house in South Africa to this little small house where she could not even move without walking into another wall. And she actually, what happened to the trauma of moving from South Africa to another country caused that woman to murder her 3 kids. They finished with the trial now, so they tried a lot of things, the psychologists, to get her off, to say that it was like she loved her children and it was like a love murder. She didn't want to see her children grow up in that country. She was afraid of her husband leaving her. She didn't want to kill herself, because maybe if she killed herself, her husband would marry another woman, and she didn't want her 3 children to grow up with another mother, so she thought of taking the children and then taking herself out of this life as well. But her attempt for suicide failed. But she killed the 3 children. So she was found guilty of murdering of the 3 children, I think a week before last week. But if you really read that woman's story, that is trauma. This is the effect of what happened. The starting point of that was trauma. She couldn't fall pregnant in South Africa. They had to go for a lot of fertility treatment in South Africa. She lost 2 babies before she had the firstborn girl. She lost another baby. The fertility process didn't work, and then eventually she fell pregnant with the twins, the youngest girls. I think they were age 2 or something when she murdered them. And then the one of the twins were born with a cleft lip. And it was just traumatic. So she went into post-traumatic stress after the birth of the children, and it just never healed. So it was just the one trauma on top of the other trauma on top of the other trauma, and eventually that woman, she just cracked. She just collapsed. Her whole being collapsed. And she did something that, as we are sitting here, none of us can envision. That what she did is she took cable ties and she choked her 3 daughters to death with a cable tie. And then she saw it's taking too long to do that, and she took their little blankets and she actually, what is versmoor? She suffocated them with the blankets. So can you just imagine what was wrong in that woman? Remember I told you the other day that if we have all of this trauma, then eventually it will run down into a burnout. That woman, it was severe, just she lost everything. She completely just backed up. So immediate emotional reactions to a trauma can be like we explained the other day, and I'm just going to take some of it out of the columns. You have the complete columns in your books. So if you afterwards want to help somebody with trauma, you can look at some of the symptoms, look at some of the reactions, and then ask yourself, what is this? Is this a reaction on trauma, or why is this person doing this? Why do I see this? Why do I hear this? So the first thing, like in the middle of the immediate emotional reactions, that person will experience a feeling that things are not happening. This is not real. It's like a depersonalization. They feel as if they are watching it from afar. They're not part of the scene. Have you experienced some trauma in your life where you actually are on that scene? That's when my husband died. I was there standing next to him, but it was if I'm not there. It was as if I'm not present, as if I am looking at something that I don't understand. I don't know what is happening here. So sometimes when you have trauma, the immediate emotional reaction of your people will be that they feel as if they are not present. Say, for instance, somebody comes into this church. Some of us will be like spectators. We will look at the scene and we will say, what is happening here? What is going on here? Is this really happening to me? Or am I it's like watching a movie, it's happening to somebody else? So one of the most important immediate emotional reactions is depersonalization. People will see themselves not being part of the scene. Then a delayed emotional reactions, and we spoke about it the day before yesterday as well, we spoke about irritability. People will start irritate you. And sometimes we will just internalize that irritation. We won't tell them you're irritating me, but we feel irritated. It is a delayed emotional reaction. We spoke about depression. We spoke about mood swings. That is part of this reaction. And then there's a very big delayed, a major one, is people have the fear of the trauma recurrence. They are afraid of this thing happening to them again. I took over from Pastor Henny. I followed when he left Shekinah Whitfield. I took over as a senior pastor, and I think I was there for about a year. And then one Sunday evening after the service, we were locking up the church, my husband and myself and another young couple, and from the corner of my eye, I saw the gate. And what I saw was 3 men running through the gate with guns. And I said to my husband, we have trouble. And my husband just he finished locking the church, and the next minute they were on us. And they actually threw him on the floor and they started beating him up, and they were searching the females, bodily searching us for keys and for valuables, taking all our jewelry. They stole my bag in which I had my Bible. I think they thought it was a computer bag, a laptop bag. And I begged them, please just give my bag back. There's nothing in it. I just want my Bible back. Please just give me my Bible back. What happened there is afterwards, my fear to go back to church and to walk out of the church at night, because I was afraid of that thing happening again. I was afraid of leaving the church and they catch us outside the church again. So, but what we did then, because sometimes something good comes out of trauma like that, is we build a buddy system in church. So nobody was allowed to leave the church unless there's 2 or 3 leaving with them. So, and if you drive out of the gates of the church, somebody must wait on the outside. Somebody will leave, wait on the outside of the church in the car, and check everybody and see that everybody leaves. And I can remember a delayed emotional response from my husband at that stage is after we went home that night, around about 3 o'clock the next morning, I woke up with my husband next to me crying. He was in bed crying. And I thought, okay, what is wrong? And I said to him, what is wrong? We are safe. They took my car, they stole our car, and they stole a lot of our stuff. But they took the keys of the church as well. They took our house keys and everything. But you know what? They didn't force us back into the church. So much more could have happened than what happened. And then my husband said to me, he took me in his arms and he said to me, and men, this is true of all men, I want you to understand that if they raped you tonight, I would not have been able to help you. That's a reality, men. If somebody comes into your house and they harm your wife and your children, but they keep you at gunpoint, they hold you at gunpoint, and they keep on beating you and shouting at you, or they tie you up, or they knock you unconscious, you could not have done anything to protect your family. And you have to understand that trauma will have a delayed emotional response. My husband didn't want to allow me even to drive by myself after 5 in the evening for a very long time of our life. And he said, you can't drive all by yourself because it's not safe. So that is what I'm trying to explain here, is you have to understand if there's members in your church who go through a traumatic event in their life, whatever that event is, a delayed emotional reaction can be a fear of the trauma recurrence. Immediate physical reactions. Remember, we have emotional reactions to trauma and we have physical reactions to trauma. Immediate physical reactions is they will have nausea. They will even vomit at the crime scene. So it's a physical reaction. They will go into sweating or they will go into shivering at the crime scene. That is an immediate thing, or immediately 2 or 3 or 4 hours after the trauma happened. They will have muscle tremors and they will go into uncontrollable shaking. You can see them, they just shake. And that is because of the trauma. They will have extreme fatigue or exhaustion. They just want to sleep. You can see them, they just want to fall asleep. And have you seen a young child? I don't know, my grandmother told me that, and my mother told me that, and I did it with my children, and now I tell my daughter that when a little child falls, and he bumps his head or he gets hurt, and you know the little ones can cry and cry and cry. You are not allowed to, you can't allow them to go to sleep then, because they're too traumatized. Because that is an immediate physical reaction. Is the body, the adrenaline is gone now, and once the adrenaline is gone, they want to sleep. So you will see that they're very, very tired as well. What is delayed physical reactions to trauma is the second one. We spoke about sleep disturbances, nightmare, is somatization. And what that word means, they will have an increased focus on, and they will have an increased worry about body aches and pains. So all of a sudden, a delayed physical reaction to trauma will be all of a sudden they will start complaining. They will say, yes, my back is sore. And this afternoon they will say, oh, my neck is sore. They never complained about body aches. They were strong people. You never heard them complaining about something that's wrong in the body. But because of the trauma, now all of a sudden when there's an ache in the body, it becomes a problem to them. So there will all this body complaints. They will have appetite and digestive changes. They will stop eating or they will start overeating. One of the things that many women do after they've been the victims of sexual assault, sexual abuse, is they start eating. They start eating and they become very, very obese. They become very, very fat. So why do they do that? And if you talk to them and you sit down with them, they will tell you, I am making myself as ugly as possible, so that no man will ever look at me again with the idea in his mind to rape me. I'm serious. So a lot of overweight women, if you talk to them and you take it back to why are you obese? Why did you just go into this absolutely negative eating pattern in your life? You can take it back to abuse. That's where it started. And it's not only with women, it's with men as well. The newest statistic shows that 1 out of every 2 women and 1 out of every 2 men will suffer from one kind or another form of sexual abuse. So it's not only women, it's males as well. They also nowadays suffer from sexual abuse. And remember, sexual abuse is not only intercourse. So people think sexual abuse is intercourse. Sexual abuse is grooming as well, where they start grooming young children in order to abuse them so that they don't think that the abuse is wrong. That is something I would train you on at a later stage if I'm allowed to. They will have a lowered resistance to colds and infection. So they will also, delayed physical reaction can be like autoimmunity disease. So they've always been strong against viruses and bacteria. They didn't fall sick very easily, but after this they fall sick easily. They have a lowered resistance. Now, very interesting, and there's long-term health effects for trauma. And some long-term health effects are heart problems. People suffering from problems of their heart. They have heart failure, they have anginas, they have pain in the heart, they have difficulty with the arteries, and it's because of the trauma that has never been dealt with. Okay, they can have, like I said, autoimmune system problems. They will develop problems with their liver. I explained to you the day before yesterday, my thyroid worked 100% before my husband died, and the trauma actually caused my thyroid to stop working. So I have a complete underactive thyroid after the trauma. The trauma caused that in my body. So we have to understand, if people go through trauma, there will be a physical effect on that person's body. Okay. Then immediate cognitive. Cognitive means mental. My mental reactions. There's mental reactions to trauma as well. The last one I have there is one of the cognitive mental reactions is they will misinterpret a current situation. They will read it wrong. They will look at a current situation and they will see it as being dangerous, although it's not dangerous. Because their mind tells them this is a dangerous situation. Remember the last time something like this happened? It was a dangerous situation. Remember last time you got stuck on a roadside, by the roadside, they attacked you and they took your car from you. So this can be dangerous again. So they just look at a new situation and they say, but this is a dangerous situation. Although it's not dangerous, it can be dangerous. Those people who attacked in their church, the minute somebody strange walks into their building, they will look and they will say, who are these guys? What are they doing here? Are they here to rob us again? Somebody go and ask them, some of your ushers, just close on them. Just watch them all the time, because it can be a dangerous situation, although it's maybe just visitors. They're just coming to my church for the first time. So do you understand the immediate mental, the cognitive reactions, and then delayed cognitive reactions, things that happen to the cognitive reasoning, the mental side of people, is they will have difficulty in making decisions. So if you sit with leadership on your board, and one of your leaders went through really, really bad traumatic experiences, and you have a church board meeting, don't pressure that guy to give you his opinion. You have to know it as a leader, because you put him under so much pressure that within a month or two he will resign from leadership. Because he cannot sit in that meeting and act like this. Because there's a delayed cognitive reaction because of the trauma. He will have difficulty in making decisions. Okay, another cognitive delayed one in your books, they believe that their memories are dangerous. They don't want to go back to that memory because that memory makes them afraid. Or they will generalize all triggers. For instance, if somebody comes into your house during daytime, you will be afraid every day that somebody will walk into your house. That is also a mental thing. It's a way of reasoning about this. I reason about this thing. Or they will have suicidal thinking. Remember what I said about this woman who moved to Timaru in New Zealand? Her result, her delayed cognitive reaction on all the traumas that she went through in her life, was suicidal thinking. And not only suicidal thinking, she decided to take her children out of the picture as well. So if people do not get the proper help of the trauma, and if you do not sit with them and you work through this trauma, suicidal thinking is not something that is uncommon after a big trauma. Because they feel like failures then. You have to remember, a big cognitive thing is, I feel like a failure. I feel that I could have stopped this. I could have prevented this. And I didn't stop it. So now I'm a failure. So if I'm a failure, then something else happens and I feel like a failure again, and something else happens and it just increases my feelings of being a failure. I will eventually decide to take myself out of this world. Okay. If we look at behavioral reactions, what we discussed a lot of this as well, where they will have an increased use of substance abuse, alcohol, they will increase use of drugs, they will have an increased use of tobacco, they will withdraw, they will become apathetic, and delayed behavioral reactions is they will have an avoidance of event reminders. Event reminders mean one of the case studies showed that this woman was, she went home, she was in like a hostel at school, she was in a boarding school, and then she went home, say during the July, when she went home during the July school holidays. But during the July school holidays, an uncle of them, he would also always visit the family during the July holidays. But that uncle abused that person, that child, during the July holidays. So whenever that child went home during July and she heard that the uncle is coming as well, she knew she was going to be abused, because that's the only time the uncle had contact with her. So what happened with her when she was a grown-up woman, she never ever wanted to take leave from work in July. And the managers could not understand that. And they said to her, but you always put in leave some other times of the year, but the quiet time of the company is in July, so we would recommend that you take your leave in July. And she said, I refuse. Why? Because being on leave in July triggered being on school holiday during July, being sexually abused. So once they sat down with her, they could get behind the way of reasoning. And sometimes even the event reminders is you don't want to. My husband died on the 11th of October, so for a very, very long time, I actually wanted my calendar to be 10 October, 12 October. I wanted to avoid the day of the 11th of October. It was like that day, the date reminded me of something very terrible that happened in my life. So they will avoid event reminders. They will avoid Christmas time. They will try to avoid birthday celebrations. They will try to avoid going on holiday to a specific place. So that can be a delayed reaction. Immediate existential reactions is immediate existential means the why I live. So an immediate reaction of that can be that you have to restore their faith in the goodness of people. Because if there was trauma, like a rape, like an assault, like a crime or whatever, they lose their faith in the goodness of people. So something like that, what happened here last night where somebody broke in, they actually just stole those 2 curtains. That's why they broke in. They broke down that door. Poor Pastor Abby and them will have to fix that door, and they stole 2 curtains. So what can happen now is Pastor Abby can lose his belief in the goodness of the people that's living next to his church or in the area of his church. And then a delayed existential reaction, we spoke about this where we can say, why me, Lord? Somebody said to me, the other day I said, we ask why, Lord, and we should focus on who is God. So somebody said, a lot of people sometimes say, why did this happen to me? Why did I have to go through this? Why me, Lord? There was a song many years ago, Why Me, Lord? And then my answer to them will be, why not you?
Yes. Who should it be?
Yeah, what makes you so special that it could not be you? So it's not about why me, it's about why not you. And I once said to somebody, you have to remember that if we go through a trauma or a crisis in our lives, it's not so that we can all of a sudden realize how strong God is and how big God is. God is strong and God is big. He's always been strong. He's always been big. He's always been God. Sometimes we go through battles in life so that we can find out the amount of strength that God has placed on the inside of us. Then we will understand why me. Because God says, I will never ever bring something on your road, bring something in your life that you cannot handle. He says that. So why me, Lord? Thank you, Lord, that you decided that this thing can happen to me, because now I can learn what is the amount of strength that you have deposited on my inside. I can go through this because you planted that in my mother's womb. You wove it into my being when I was in my mother's womb. You gave me enough strength to go through this. With you on my side, my God has never lost a battle. I don't know about you guys, but the God I serve has never lost a battle. Not even on the cross. Right through the Bible, the biblical history, God has never lost a battle. And if I am a child of God and God is living on the inside of me, I cannot lose a battle. That's what Pastor Abby spoke about. It's internal motivation. So if we look at the external factors in our life, it will bring us down. It will tell us we cannot make it. We will even look at our sin and we will think that our sin is greater than God's grace. God cannot forgive us our sin. What we've done is too terrible. And God says, no, you must understand, you must know that my grace will always be higher and bigger than your sin. Always. And with God on my side, I cannot lose a battle. But trauma sometimes put us right there in the middle of the battlefield. And we start to battle emotionally. We start to battle physically. We have cognitive battles. We have all these kinds of battles that we have to work through. But if we just understand that God is on our side and He will take us through this. And God says, you serve me in spirit and truth. And the spirit is knowing that God will take me through. The truth is that I have to go and find help. Because the outside world forces us into silence. There's a stigma attached to counseling. People will tell me when they come to me for counseling, please, nobody must know I'm here with you. And I say, why? Why can't they know that you come for counseling? No, but then they're going to look at me differently. They're going to think I'm not able to cope. They're going to think that I'm weak. And I always tell them, you're not weak sitting here. It takes a strong man or a strong woman to sit in a counselor's office and to actually tell them what happened and share their life with them. And I will always tell them, don't think whatever you're going to share with me will ever get me to a point where I lose my respect for you. I have more respect for you who come searching for help than for those people who don't search for help and they just carry on as if nothing happened. Okay, so there is immediate reactions, there's delayed reactions. Then I have the cognitive triad of trauma. It is in your manuals. That's why I don't have slides today. And this is very important for everybody to understand. There's a cognitive triad of trauma. And the first one, when there's trauma, it changes the person's view of the world. Doesn't matter what that trauma is. If that trauma is poverty, I like the way that Pastor Abby spoke, that something will motivate you. Something will motivate you to get out of that situation, to change the situation, to become a leader. And he spoke about that guy who grew up in poverty and he said, I'm not going to allow this to go into my next generation. So, but trauma, growing up without a mother or father, losing a mother or father when you were still a child, the very early stage of your life, you lost your mother or your father, it will change your view of the world. The people who hijacked us at our church, the people who, if you're involved in a crime or whatever, it will tell you that the world is a dangerous place. A child has been exposed to physical, any kind of abuse. And you have to understand there's 7 kinds of abuse that stand in court today. Because whenever we think of abuse, we just think of sexual abuse, we think of physical abuse, because that's what you see and that's what you can take to court. Emotional abuse is one of the biggest enemies we have on this planet Earth. Is where people abuse one another emotionally. We tell them they're bad. We tell them they're stupid. We tell them they will become nothing. They will reach nothing in life. They will be just as bad as their father or their mother. Your father's been a drunkard and you are going to be a drunkard. We emotionally abuse people. And you can't see the scars of emotional abuse because it's internal scars. And it's the most difficult scars to heal is the emotional abuse scars. You have verbal abuse. We all know what verbal abuse is. Where you swear at people, where you call them names, where you do all kinds of things with them. You have financial abuse. Financial abuse is where parents actually financially abuse their children. They use finances to get the children to like them. When sometimes when they have a lot of money, they buy the children's love with the money. So you have financial abuse, you have educational abuse. That's where parents do not send their children to school. They do not allow them to get an education. They take them out of school. They get them involved in all kinds of crimes and wrong kind of doing things. So it's educational abuse. You get spiritual abuse. Let me tell you, there's spiritual leaders that abuse their people. We read about it every day. Hopefully Pastor Abby doesn't spray you with doom to kill the demons in you. But we have spiritual abuse. That's toxic spiritual abuse. So there's different kinds of abuse that we have to look at, and we have to understand that any kind of trauma will change a person's worldview. It will tell them that people cannot be trusted. If a member of an assembly was abused by his or her pastor, they will have the understanding, they will just say, I will never ever trust a pastor again. I cannot even go to church because I'm not safe in church. And they will just believe that life is unpredictable. What is the second corner, the left-hand side corner of the triad, is trauma always change the view of the person's self, views about self. So trauma will bring the understanding, or it will make you think, I'm not competent. I cannot do this. I'm incompetent. Sometimes, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. Sometimes, I should have reacted differently. When there's trauma, this is what people think. I should have reacted differently. Or they will say, it's too much for me to handle, like this woman, what happened to this lady. I feel damaged. You have to understand, when there's sexual abuse, the victim of sexual abuse always feel like damaged goods. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you work with a lady or a man in your church that was exposed to sexual abuse, one of the things you have to understand is they feel secondhand. They feel like used goods. Yeah, it just affects their self-esteem. They don't think a lot of themselves. Okay, and that is the second triad. And the third one is the views about the future, is they can fall into a thinking pattern that things will never be the same or things will never change. So like Pastor Abby said, growing up in poverty, we can actually adapt the worldview. We can adapt the view, but this trauma of being so poor, growing up in extreme poverty or extreme neglect, it will never change. And we see it amongst the youths today. They just think it's never going to change. My grandparents were poor. My parents were poor. What am going to become of me? I'm going to be poor as well. So they don't have this intrinsic motivation by saying, but I can stand up and I can make a difference. I can be the generation who changes this. Pastors, it takes, and young people sitting there, it takes one person to stand up and say, this is not going to continue in my family line. Do you hear me? Those youngsters sitting there at the back. It takes, you just have to rise up and say, this is not going to continue in my family. And if I'm the one that's bringing the change, I'm the one that's bringing the change. Trauma is also linked to behavioral patterns. We get used to the behavioral patterns in the household, the behavioral patterns of the community, the behavioral patterns in life, and then we say, we cannot change this pattern, it's going to be like this forever. And when we work with the youth, we have to bring the understanding to them that it does not have to be the same as it has been for your parents and your grandparents and your great-great-great-great-great-grandparents. You can change the family line. You can change it. It's in your power to do it. If you believe in God, you have God on the inside. And who can stand against God? What can man do to me if God is on my side? Okay. They will ask, what is the point in living? They will say, it is hopeless. I will never be able to get over this. When I work with, say for instance, people who lost their spouse, most often they will say to me, Christa, I don't know how I'm ever going to get over this. I don't think I'm going to get over this. And then you have to help them. You have to guide them to understand that it was a thing that happened, but they still have a future. They can't be stuck and frozen in that moment. They have to move. I had a ladies' retreat last weekend, and one of the ladies came to the front, and she said, one morning in 2016, when I woke up, my husband was dead. He died during the night. And when I tried to wake him up, I couldn't. I saw he was dead. And she said, and Pastor Christa, I'm still frozen in 2016. I have not left that morning. I cannot move beyond that morning. I don't know how to move away from that. And by God's grace, that woman stood on the pulpit on that Sunday before we came home, and she said, you have to look at me. God unfroze 2016 in my life. And I'm ready to take up my part in church. Because she said, I didn't even want to be involved in the church. I just wanted to go to church and go home. Church, go home. She said, and now I realized that with the help of God, I can move past that point of trauma, and I can actually mean something in my church and do something in my church. And some of the ladies, the leadership there, I said to her, but what is your ministry? She said, I was a very big events organizer before my husband died, and I just left everything. I dropped everything. And they just looked at her, and she said, you're an events organizer? She said, yes. So they said, do you want to become involved in events organizing in our church? And she said, please. So with God, everything is possible. But sometimes in trauma, people feel that I don't have a future. I can't move beyond this point. I don't know how I'm ever going to get over this. Okay, so that is the triad. And then there's just a lot of things that I have in there that I don't have time to spend a lot of time on. And that is what I said the other day. We have to remove the stigma. And pastors, I want you to take note of something. If you look on my notes, it says remove the stigma. They say, the good news is that people can recover from the impact of trauma when we understand more about it. We don't understand trauma. We don't understand what trauma does to the human body, to the human mind, to the human emotions. So once we understand that, we can recover from trauma. You can help the people in your church to recover from trauma. I said to some of my pastoral friends, I said, You know, when we have church service and we invite people to the front to give their lives to Jesus Christ, and then we do the sinner's prayer, and after we did the sinner's prayer with them, we invite them to the new membership class. Do you do that in your church? So then they go through the new membership class, or they go through the EE1 or EE2 or EE3 or the evangelic program that we have to tell them what a Christian is all about, or what is this church doing. And I said to them, the first compulsory session after giving your heart to Jesus Christ is to have an appointment with one of the counselors of church. You must have a counseling team. And say, we are going to set up a meeting of 2 hours with one of our counselors, and that counselor must be a trained counselor who know that they have to ask this person, where do you come from? Or else they would have given their life to Jesus Christ, spiritual rebirth, but there's still emotional issues. And then they always look at themselves not being good enough, like we said now. They will work harder, they will pray more, they think the more they work for God, the better they will become in their relationship. The harder I work, the more God accepts me. So they don't understand that God accepts me unconditionally. And this is what I say here. In that paragraph I say, children often feel powerless because they want to fix the problem, but they realize that they can't. This is what our youth sit with. Sadly, children also tend to blame themselves when things go wrong, because they have a natural built-in sense that they are the center of their world. We call children where parents died at an early stage or where parents got divorced, the terminology for that children in the counseling world or in psychology is, we call them the forgotten mourners, or the forgotten grievers. So we forget that they mourn as well. Say for instance, one of the parents die. Where's the focus? On who is the major focus? On the husband or the wife? People stop with the children as well, but their focus is with the adult. To help them come past this, what do? We focus on being there for the sister or the brother. But then there's little children as well. What happens to them? We forget that they are grieving as well. We forget that they are mourning as well. It's because we don't know how to help them, that's why we don't help them. And they're also called children of sorrow. Children that comes from a divorce background are called, the name for them are children of sorrow. Because I've spoken to people in their 40s, 50s who grew up and their parents got divorced when they were 10 or 15 or 8 or 10 years old. The first thing they will tell us, I still feel guilty about my parents' divorce because I think if I was just a better child, if I just looked after my room, if I just cleaned up my room, if I just did the work in the house that my mother always wanted me to do, my parents would not have gotten divorced. And they will tell me, youngsters that come to me, high school children where there's a divorce, they will tell me, I think I could have stopped it by just being a better child. Because they have this feeling. Remember, a child, the world is just about themselves. When you have little children, they will say, it's me, it's mine, don't take mine. Don't play with my car, it's mine, it's my mother, it's my father. Because the world just revolves around themselves. And when trauma strikes a household, if children are not helped through this traumatic event, they become forgotten mourners. We just think they're too small to know. The impact on them was not that big. It's big on them. Okay, so what I say is we have to remove the stigma. We have to, another problem is, the second barrier is there's a lack of trauma-informed practices. Not only in the organizational world, there's a lack of trauma-informed practices within the church as well. So my question is there a counseling team in your assembly that is specialized in trauma counseling? Because Pastor, you don't have the time to do that. You are already a victim of vicarious trauma. You are already a victim of second-hand trauma. So we have to have a team that actually specializes in trauma. So is there a trauma-informed practice? Is there some classes that you present in your church on trauma? Do you get somebody in to come and speak to your people about trauma, to train them up in trauma? Do you expose your leadership in church to trauma training? So they know what trauma is about, so they know how to work with the members of the assembly. So in organizations, we find a lack, when I work with organizations, I see this, there's a lack of trauma-informed practices in the organization. And if you have to understand that if I work in an organization and there's nobody who understands the fact that I've been traumatized, so they treat me as if I have not been traumatized. They just want me to carry on as if nothing happened. There's a word in there that you will see. It is seen as institutional betrayal. The institute betrays me because the institute, the school, or the organization, the company, or pastors, the church betrays me. Because they do not understand, they do not try to help me, they're not there for me. They just expect of me to carry on as if this has not happened. You're a child of God, carry on. Put it behind you. It's time to move on. Some people cannot just move on. And the third barrier to effective trauma help is a lack of clear direction of responsibilities. You have to understand when somebody has been traumatized, the moment you put them in an unorganized situation, it will intensify their trauma. They can't operate in chaos. I don't know how to put this more clear. So in church, we have to have structure. We have to have structure. Why? It's for those individuals who has been taken out of their structure and has been dumped into chaos in their whole life because of the trauma. Now we put them in church and church is chaotic. There's no structure in church. There's no ushers. The chairs are not in order when they walk into church. They don't know who's doing what. They don't know what's going to happen next, They feel this immense insecurity in church. They have this immense insecurity in school, immense insecurity in society. And you have to understand that is what the devil is doing. The devil is causing this immense chaos in our educational system because it intensifies trauma. It actually hinders our young generation to be the next leaders. I listened to Abby and I think you can gather that I have an internal motivation for trauma. I don't have an external motivation. Because I believe it is, the Bible says that I cannot stay quiet. I cannot remain silent with the word of God because it's shut up in my bones. It's like a fire shut up in my bones, the word of God and who God is. And I cannot remain silent. And I am telling you today that I think God has put me through a lot of trauma in my life and now it's shut up in my bones that people need healing. We can help people. We can support people. And it's not to say that God is always in the picture. So some of the trauma training, somebody asked me, what do I do? And you will see it's clear direction and responsibilities. In a church, I don't want to say you must have. I want to say you should have. Well, actually, I feel you must have. But I can't force anybody. There should be training programs in a local church that deals with trauma. You have to tell your people what is the common causes of trauma. You have to discuss like the effects of trauma on the brain and on the body. Like I spoke the day before yesterday, neurons and axons die. There's hormones that get sent into the body that's in the wrong direction. You have to recognize, must be able to recognize the symptoms of trauma. We talk about trauma bonding. Bonding is like you are glued to that situation that happened. What happens in trauma bonding? What happens to marriages that is caught up in trauma? What happens to the youngsters and the youth? Social media. Oh my gosh. When I speak to parents, I say, why do you buy a smartphone for your child? Now the youngsters they just laugh there down at the corner. They just